Okay, so this is House of Pianos, finally, the name. Episode 2. With us is Dr. Hugh Benham.
I was talking to various people in the early 90s, and it led eventually to a conversation with Adrian Green, who's the boss of Convivial Records, and he was very encouraging, and we arranged a recording session at a big church in Birmingham, and I brought along a whole series of pieces that I'd written, some of which more or less specially for that occasion in 2011. They were recorded and released as Convivial Records number 11. It was very early in their career. And that made me think some of this stuff sounds better than I was expecting. It sounds very respectable. And the people who were singing it and producing it, all the rest of it, I don't think they were just being polite. They were quite enthusiastic. And it eventually led to getting some of it published in the States. I sent a CD to somebody there who liked it and gave it to a firm there who published some of the pieces. They took ages to do it, and they never sold very many of them. And then later on, I was attached to UMP, who actually offered, after the second Sacred Music CD, to take more or less anything from that if I wanted to give them. And subsequently, I sent them quite a lot of piano music and other music as well. So I think that's the story, really. And having done that, made that first recording, I was encouraged to do a second one, which I think is better, and then the 4-piano one, which you and Peter helped me with so much, which started off, as we know, during lockdown. The 4-piano disc was compiled as a result of 2 recording sessions. One was in 2020, very soon after the lockdowns had finished, and we were sort of getting back to something like normal. And the other one was in, I think it was the spring of 2021. They were both at London in a very nice recording studio. And the original plan was to do a joint compilation with another composer, but for various reasons that didn't work. And I was quite pleased, actually, in some ways, to be able to extend into a complete version for that. And Adrian Green, who's the boss of Convivial Records, sort of this marvellous title, 4-piano, which is statingly obvious, but never mind. It's very appropriate, and it seems to fit well. And lovely little design, which is paid quite a bit to get, but never mind. A piano drawn in one line, like some of these marvellous drawings that Picasso used to do, but I don't think that's by Picasso. When 4-piano was envisaged, and I was talking to Adrian about it to start with, we suddenly both at the same time thought, well, if you're having 2 pianists, it's nice to have them alternating, but you also have them playing together, and that's what made me write the duets. So I said one of them, the opening idea, that that bit was written years ago, but the rest of it was new, and the other one sort of a bit lighter, so that, 2 pianos would be great. Obviously that they overlap a bit, don't they? And one of the pieces that I've heard recently, I've known it on and off for some years, is Stravinsky's, I think it's Concerto for 2 pianos, isn't it? There's another Sonata for 2 pianos, if I've got it right. And I mean, I shan't write anything quite like that, but that's a kind of inspiration, something that makes you think, well, this is worth doing. I first composed one in the 1990s. I played at the college where I was teaching with a colleague, and it just, coming back to it 30 years later, it didn't seem very good. So I just kept the opening bar or so, and that developed into one called Finale, which again comes on the 4-piano piece. Otherwise, that was completely new in 2021. Then I wrote a smaller piece called Barbara Allen, some variations on that. I thought would be a bit more kind of attractive maybe, and people would know the tune. And then, having seen how brilliantly you play these things, both as soloists and as a duet group, I thought, well, I really must try and do a bit more. So I came up with these 3 duets, which were probably back in, I think I started them in the spring, and they finished round about July, something like that. And of course, very often I don't think of titles. So having written these things, I thought, well, I could call them duet number 1, number 2, number 3, which is quite nice. But thinking about some sort of title, I thought, well, there could be the 3 stages in a day. The first one I called Good Morning. The second one was an afternoon interrupted, because it's very peaceful and sort of after lunch-ish, and then it's broken into by a slightly noisier interlude. And the last one is called Ride on a Cool Summer Evening. That's right. And there's a great feeling of movement through that. You can imagine a bicycle or a car or something in that.
Oh, he's going fast.
It's 84 a minute, but shall we do it a little bit slower? Or shall I go slower?
I don't know.
I'm trying to help you, that's all I'm trying to do.
That wasn't helpful. He cheated. He pointed elsewhere. I counted. He said he didn't come. No, I'm not having it.
Repeat.
Yes, but count. I'm sorry. Where am I?
Don't ask me now where you are after all this. No, thank you very much. Okay. Oh yes, absolutely right.
And then we are. So
yes,
that's your. That is a very good morning. It's a lively good morning.
yes, that's right.
Okay, then he says slightly slower.
It could go even faster.
He's
It
running.
could go even faster.
It can go even faster. Did you hear that? Yes.
Yeah, after practicing.
And coffee.
Okay, and then 4 sharps. Okay. Wait a second. Now this is falling onto that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mean this octave higher?
I mean, it's at the fifth bit.
Yeah, it's just doubling. The left.
No. My left and my
Yes, that's an error in printing out. Yes, you can't do it twice over.
Unless it was a double manual. So was that a slip up of an organist?
It could be. It could be.
I knew it. Way he's doing that. Oh, no, I'm not there. I'm there. You there.
you. Well done.
That was first reading. That was the point of making the mess.
I think it's sort of light classical, isn't it, really? It's not jazzy. I mean, a lot of it is based on that motif which you said at the beginning. I don't think it necessarily says good morning, but it's a sort of kind of wake up kind of idea, isn't it? And it's march-like. I wanted to have something which perhaps was between the lightness of Barbara Allen on this disc and the heaviness of the finale, which is, got some quite thick textures in it, hasn't it, most of the time. This got some thick textures as well, but a bit more variety, I think. So it's meant to be, well, a bit challenging perhaps, but not much.
The duets get a bad rep sometimes, people thinking that it's for the amateur type of crowd. And although they may be accessible, it is chamber music after all. And the complexity of having four hands in close proximity, that means the position as well gets altered. It is the finale, isn't it, that has the big chords and octaves. That's quite hard because it's not the usual. You can't have a good position, let's say, as is recommended. So there is a little bit of that.
Yes.
Yes. So I think, generally speaking, I think that they can be enjoyed. But I would say that, with few exceptions, duets are of professional standard. There's an interesting thing with Brahms and Schubert. I don't think that these are for amateurs either. And it is funny that in both the Schubert Fantasy, I'm doing a little bit of a trajectory there. I'm going on a tangent a little bit, but both the Fantasy and the Brahms, which Brahms was playing as a duet with Clara Schumann, have some unwarranted touching.
Crossing of hands.
Where is not necessary.
Same key.
Is not necessary. And you're thinking, why did he write it so? Okay. Yeah. Now, these I can't think, because of the rhythmic incisiveness of it and the linearity of it. They're quite exposing yours. So I am not quite sure. It has to be. I would recommend it probably across the board. I know we said something else in the editions. I think you asked me about a recommendation where they are, and we pitched a little bit lower, but I think rather a distinction grade 8.
Yes.
Would be able to touch.
Yeah.
So I think that they are finely crafted, and they don't look as scary as maybe Rachmaninoff. Right? They look friendly.
No, but they have some special, unexpected.
Yes, and the final chord, that's you. That's not us. We played what he said there, so I'm just showing it is vertical in the classical manner. And I think, yes, but you have this dum pa bum pa bum, and let's see, where was it? I got I thought I saw some place where you had the dotted rhythm in the left. Is it bum bum pa bum 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 bum? No, is it another page perhaps? And the thirds, and the double thirds. Accompanying second piano, let's say, and it is a fair exchange between the two.
Yeah.
These should be a challenge. So it means that da da da.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, you know, if we're talking about somebody who's still learning,
Oh yeah.
these usually are initial. I've seen students, and I mean for a bachelor's degree, I think they were bachelors and not masters, I'm not sure. But they were in their final year and they were trying to play the BC Petite Suite. And somehow, I think, again, these would go very well. I'm talking about your pieces, with Mozart, Schubert, and the Petite Suite. But I saw the Petite Suite, it's supposed to be easy. No, because the ensemble has to be precisely together.
Yeah. Right.
So I quite like them. And I hope listeners are going to enjoy them. And so I think I'm going to say something you don't know, but we just got a date in Portsmouth Cathedral at the, what is it, live concert series, I think?
Yes,
live
what was it?
series?
January
12th.
12th.
January 12th. Yes.
Yeah, 12th. Yeah.
So we will have one of your new ones, at least.
Lovely.
Yes.
That'd be great. Yeah. I've had the disadvantage of not being able to play these with anybody. Which, you know, one could have found out certain things better if I'd been able to do that. But I've got nobody I can ask to partner me. The way I've heard them, which is not entirely reliable, is via Sibelius. And, you know, that keeps going all the time and it doesn't have any technical problems at all. So sometimes that might lead one to write things that perhaps a little bit more difficult than perhaps they ought to be.
I'll make a suggestion. You could, if you were thinking of learners rather than professional performance, I mean that absolutely is not an issue for us. I would recommend an easier version.
Say that they were written with you and Peter in mind, having heard what you've been able to do elsewhere. I think without that, I wouldn't have written those pieces. And I did also think about writing some more, rather in the vein of Barbara Allen, based on popular tunes, but I wonder to what extent those tunes are popular any longer, how widely they're known, and that's why I went for this independent melody, which, you know, is a creation without any quotations in it. It's very mixed, actually. Most things arise from improvising at the piano. An idea will come up and I think, well, that might be useful to explore and to make something of. I will then try to memorize some of it rather than write anything down too soon. Sometimes when things are written down, they seem to solidify in a way that you don't. You want a lot of possibility, so every time I improvise it will sound slightly differently. Then I have to try and remember the one which I think sounds best. Then if I write anything down, I very often write it down in a very scrappy sort of fashion, which may actually just use letter names rather than actual anything on a stave. If I have a stave, I very often draw that rather than use manuscript paper, because I find somehow that's very regimented, and if I can just space it out how I like it, sometimes only 2 or 3 staves on a page, I find that's more useful. Then at some stage I transfer this to Sibelius, where you can infinitely twiddle around with it. So, you know, everything gets changed an enormous amount, so that the end product is probably very little alike what the original idea was. And by playing it through on Sibelius, which is not ideal, admittedly, you do get some idea what it's going to sound like if you can't play it yourself. And that, of course, is the case with those pieces.
Intrigued by the fact that you say that you keep it in your head. Isn't there a danger of losing it the phrase or something specific, or is that when you would actually write that down if you wanted
If
to?
it's good, it'll stay there. If it's not, it probably won't.
Okay.
There seem to be so many other pressures on time, and I find sometimes that the best times of day are about 6:30 to 7:30 in the morning, or sometimes the other end of the day, and sometimes not so much in the middle when you get taken up with other duties and so forth. And I suppose a long time ago, I mean, I've only been a sort of a moderately serious composer for probably about 15 years at the most. I used to think, well, is it really a useful use of time to do all this, or am I just wasting my time? I've gradually got out of that idea, but on the other hand, I suppose I do not want to devote so much time to something that if it goes wrong, it will seem to be a waste. That's why I probably wouldn't want to write a symphony, because I'd be rather afraid of, you know, having done all that work, and would it ever actually get performed? And with thanks to Adrian and Convivium Singers and yourself, things have now been performed, which of course makes it much more worthwhile doing, because you can actually hear it. I mean, if we go back 10, 15 years, I've written a fair amount for my church choir, which of course is fairly simple stuff. And I sometimes used to think, although they sing it quite well, I'd really like to hear it sung excellently by people who are trained singers. And it's a long story, but I got in touch with Convivium Singers, and they wrote to do that for me, and that made me think, yes, there's more to this than I perhaps thought at one time. So it's being able to have things performed, I think, that's so important, if you can't do it yourself.
Future plans?
Sure. Until very recently, I've composed only choral music, a few organ pieces, and quite a lot for piano solo and duet. Now, I want to broaden out a little bit, and I've just composed 2 pieces for oboe and piano for a local duo. The first is called Distant Village, and it ends with a quotation from the hymn tune Down Ampney, which is written by Vaughan Williams, who's been very much in the news recently. And before we hear that at the end, there are hints of it, so that we approach it as it were in the distance, and we're approaching it. So that's one thing that's been more or less completed. I know that the first of these pieces is being rehearsed. I haven't heard it yet, but I'm looking forward to that. The second piece will be called Cantabile and Scherzando. It's a slightly more ambitious 5-minute piece, and the name was suggested when I listened to Young Musician of the Year, and there was a piece with that very title. I think it was for brass. It's nothing like what I've written, but I like the title, and I thought, well, let's try and do something that fits into that sort of format. I couldn't think of any imaginative title for it, like, you know, something to do with the weather or time or whatever. So those things are done so far. I've just started also writing some music for 2 pianos, for you and Peter, of course. And these are coming along gradually. I'm experimenting. They are sort of studies in it rather than perhaps finished pieces at this stage. And then at some time, fairly soon, I shall probably have a go at writing a bit more sacred music. But there's so much of that on the market at the moment that the market seems to be almost overcrowded, and I may have done enough of that already anyway. So there are other prospects like playing string quartets and all that sort of thing might lie ahead.
Shall we go and see a little bit of the next one, and then I'll ask you some
Indeed.
more?
Yeah.
Okay, so...
I mean, this one is very simple to start. Very simple to start, and then it gets quite complicated as it goes on, doesn't it? That middle episode, which has sort of come up almost like a storm in the middle of an afternoon with blue skies.
This is unknown. Also, it has page turns. that we haven't solved exactly as an issue. Let's see. Okay,
Yeah.
it says moderate tempo. Okay.
Spread them out.
So this is the interrupted afternoon. We see the interruption.
It is.
Something not
That's good, yeah.
quite, slightly
Shall we go from there?
disquieting. Okay. So I think it would be interesting to have a few comments on, let's say, how it's difficult to ask, but the type of harmonic language that you use, and I'm thinking about new music, they tend to go for experimental, and there are insinuations that if it is too simple, maybe it is commercial, and then different shades of either praise or criticism depending on who is talking. Some of your ideas on the matter?
Sure. Well, the harmonic language obviously started from what might be termed common practice harmony, but it's gradually broadened out from that. And the last piece that I've written, which is almost completed, is also the first for two pianos, and that actually uses a kind of not very aggressive bitonality. In other words, the two pianos are often playing the same idea perhaps sometimes an imitation in keys a fifth apart, so that you get some clashy harmony, but something which is not too aggressive. Very often I tend to think a quite basic progression still, so that even that piece starts off with a sort of 1-4-5-1 kind of progression, which is wrapped up because of the bitonality, but it's still there. At the end, I sometimes take the music where you're expecting it to go, but sometimes I don't. It's one of the sacred pieces on a recording I made in 2011, which is mainly in the keys of G and E, but it ends up with a C sharp major chord, which, because the text is about evermore and evermore, seems to be sort of floating into the distance and sounding quite appropriate at that point. I also find that, strange enough, serialism comes in sometimes. Even in the piano sonata that you played, the second movement, the main idea, came about with a sort of a serial idea of using all 12 notes. When I do that, I sometimes then find that I back away from it slightly and let the music sort of take its own direction, which may not be purely in a serial direction. So I'm often open to that sort of thing. And as I said elsewhere to you, that I change things an awful lot, and one tendency that there is for something to begin more radically than it finishes. I tend to, perhaps it's natural caution, back away sometimes from things, and they end up rather more conventional than perhaps they had started. The Mice in the Prom piece, which we talked about earlier, is on the in piano disc. That is fairly tonal and fairly straightforward harmonic language, I think, because that's the sort of language which that topic suggests with those traditional melodies. I mean, they can be treated differently, but I was looking for something there which started its life, actually, strangely enough, as an organ piece about 7 or 8 years ago, designed to appeal to small children, to demonstrate a church organ to them. It wasn't my own, but somewhere else. And I felt, well, if we go for too much dissonance and so forth, that would put them off, so we go for something fairly straightforward. I mean, my music is not usually very abrasive, but at times I've been trying to make it a bit more so. And I mean, in the finale, for example, there's quite a lot of discord, isn't there, really? And heavy textures and so forth, but it seems to be allied always to some sort of melodic thread. It's interesting because I read recently that Stravinsky said that, I mean, this is very difficult to believe, that he sort of begins with a melody line and then things grow out of that. I've done that sometimes. I suppose it really goes right back to when you're learning harmony to start with, or at least in the way it was taught to me. You try to harmonise melodies that are given to you. In fact, on the Sacred Music CD, which was published a little while ago, I've got 2 pieces, one of which is called Chant Donné and the other Basse Donné, after some French pieces where these were sort of deliberate scholastic exercises. The class would be given a melody, and then they write something on it which is quite imaginative, rather than just a sort of normal kind of hymn tune-like melody. I cheated a bit because I wrote the given song and or melody and bass as well, but I did write them separately and came back to them and thought, well, what can I do with them? I tried to avoid cheating by changing them when I could see possibilities going along that I otherwise might have chosen. So I think it's an educational process, but I'm not sure how far we're going to get with it, because it does seem that classical music, and particularly classical music with any challenge, is quite limited these days. The way that it's heard most frequently, I think, probably, is in concerts like the Proms, where they will perhaps present a concerto and a symphony by well-known composers, and then start off with some fairly dissonant orchestral piece by somebody we've never heard of before. And I noticed that with a lot of those offerings, a great deal of it comes from sonority and orchestration, and also harmony, which is not tonal harmony, but neither is it entirely atonal, I think. It is a kind of compromise between the two. But we've definitely backpedaled from where people like Webern and Stockhausen were taking us in the 60s, I think, partly via people such as Taverner, who were able to use triads in completely different ways. Vaughan Williams, of course, was doing that as well, but I think Taverner made people realise that by, for example, superimposing something quite simple with something similar, you can get remarkable effects. And other composers you might call minimalist have done the same thing, haven't they?
Shall we talk about a little bit your favorite composers and or influences on your work?
Right. Yes. As a boy, I think I would have said Bach. He made a considerable impact on me early on, and I still admire his music tremendously, but I don't listen to as much of it as I did, partly because I've heard so much of it already, I think, and I find that increasingly my listening is 20th century. Vaughan Williams is a composer who perhaps means most to me on a sort of personal, spiritual level almost. But I don't try to write like him. Admittedly, as a teenager, I wrote something called Tribute to Vaughan Williams shortly after he died, but it didn't sound much like him, apart from having a flattened seventh in one place. So I've not tried to do that. I suppose I model on him to a certain extent by using quite a bit of parallelism and sometimes modalism, but I sort of recoil if I think, oh, that sounds a bit too much like Vaughan Williams. There were one or two moments in that first oboe piece where I did actually deliberately go in that direction because that was relevant to the piece that was going to emerge at the end. Now, Stravinsky has always been somebody that I have had a great interest in. His Symphony of Psalms was the first, modern piece that I really heard, and I couldn't make head or tail of it to start with, but persevered with it until it began to make a lot of sense, and then later I actually had to teach it and examine it at various times. Those are perhaps among the most important. I mean, I like when I want something nice and mellow, I listen to Finzi, for example. But going backwards in the other direction, before Bach, I'm very fond of Corelli's music. Some of the string music there, I think, is amazing, even though the harmony is often quite straightforward. And then going back to Purcell as well, particularly some of his music for strings. And then, of course, I spent a lot of my life researching 16th century music, particularly the Taverner with an R in the middle of his name. I don't listen to that so much now because I was saturated in that at one time, and I felt that to some extent I needed a rest from it to move on. No doubt I shall return to it at some other point. But I must also, last but not least, mention Tippett, who, when I sort of was playing around with compositions around about 1990, and he was still writing at that time, I was very influenced by one or two of his pieces, and particularly his use of the interval of a fourth, but that I think has waned, although I still very much enjoy some of his earlier music to this day.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, as they say on the radio.